So Mike Palin, if we could welcome you to the stage.
Good morning, it's still morning. Wait for everyone to settle. So I'm here to talk about standards. Has this been turned off? Hang on. Right. By way of introduction, to tell you what the talk will be about, it'll be what do we mean by standards? Because standards is a generic word which is used around the industry to mean an awful lot of different types of things. But I'm going to be talking about specifically about one type of standard, and I'll describe that in a moment. And also explain why standards are part of TSA's role, and which standards are relevant to the industry. That's all sides of the industry, the laundering side, the retail cleaning side, dry cleaning, and how standards help members on a day-to-day basis. So, what standards are we talking about? I'm talking about standards which are adopted by organisations such as BSI, the British Standards Institute, which was actually created in around about 1908 to standardise nuts and bolts and screws for the engineering and construction industry. I'll also be talking about ISO standards, International Standards Organization, which was actually started in 1946. There was a meeting just after the war in London of a lot of different countries. I think 40-odd countries came together at a time when it probably took some of them 3 months to get here by ship. So it's quite an interesting development straight after the war. And also be talking about CEN standards. CEN stands for the, and excuse my French, Comité Européen de Normalisation. And that organisation was set up in Europe in 1970. It didn't actually achieve a lot for its first 15 to 20 years of life, but when the single market raised its head, it came into its own. So really, European standards, ENs, came into being, or many of them came into being from 1990 onwards. Does anybody have any idea at all how many of these standards, BS or ISO or EN standards, there are which are relevant to our industry? Owen? No? Keep going. Well, I stopped counting at around about 40. There are a heck of a lot. So, what type of standards are there? Well, there's some for product manufacture, and that would include labelling. There are some for delivering a service, so they would be looking at things like logistics, tracking vehicles, to particular protocols, that sort of thing. And management. Management covers an awful lot of different types of standards. I've got quality, which everyone's familiar, I suppose, with ISO 9000 as the big one. But there's also standards on environmental management, processing management. We'll hear a little bit more about one of those standards soon. Also on energy, and particularly how to measure energy so that you're comparing like with like. Health and safety issues, and also IT security, which is a headline topic these days. So why should these interact? How should this interact with the role of the trade association? Well, there are four main areas which the trade association has a objective to fulfill, and that is protection of an industry sector as far as regulation is concerned, or legislation, or unfair competition, to make sure that an industry as a whole gets a fair shake with government, particularly government. And promotion of its members' services to customers. You can use standards to demonstrate compliance, the level of quality of your service, and also education and training. A lot of what TSA does is involved in informing members of latest developments in technology, management systems, and it does that through conferences and also education and training courses like the laundry management course. So TSA has input to standards because they also protect members' interests and can be used to promote their businesses. So you can see there's a synergy between what the role of the TSA and the standards it produces, or it helps produce. If we look at some of the standards from industry which help the industry, the laundering and retail cleaning machinery, there are standards which help manufacturers particularly measure energy, water production rates and effect on textiles. That's quite important. So that the customer can have information which is obtained in a standardized way so they can compare like with like. One of the things which is often neglected, though, is the effect on textiles. And there are standards which will measure the effect of certain processes or certain types of machinery on textiles. And they are a very much neglected set of standards. It's worth, I think, asking manufacturers about them. Textile test methods. You might not think that the industry would be directly interested in actually textile test methods, but there are standards for measuring the performance of workwear in laundering, including certain types of personal protective equipment. And what that test method does, it's a semi-scale test method, so it's using 25 kilo type washing machines and dryers, rather than relying on laboratory tests. And what it does is give an indication of how, say, new workwear materials, fabrics, constructions would perform in laundering. And allied to that is there's a symbol qualification scheme, which is, I suppose, similar to the Kerr labelling scheme that you're familiar with. But it also, its main purpose is to convey the results of the performance test to the customer. So in the case of a laundry, you'd be interested to know how the workwear performed in those tests to see whether it was worth running tests on those new products in your own laundry. There's also a suite of standards for retail cleaning. These are 4 parts for test methods in dry cleaning, in perc, in hydrocarbon solvent, and in wet cleaning. And they're full machine tests, which will allow products to be tested and subsequently Kerr labelled. So the Kerr labelling scheme should be based on these particular test methods. So that's protection to the dry cleaner. As I've mentioned, the Kerr labelling code itself, most of it, 80% of it, is to do with domestic washing and drying, but 20% of it is dealing with retail cleaning situations. So that's the perc, hydrocarbon solvent, and wet cleaning. Hygienic processing and biocontamination control. There's a standard for cabinet roller towels, which is perhaps 20 years old and gets very little publicity or use in the UK. Certain leading laundry companies who, if you like, majored in cabinet roller towels and the cabinet roller towel service, implemented the conditions of the test method the standard, but didn't actually claim it, which for reasons which I never understood. But more recently in the rest of Europe, because this is a European standard, an EN, there's been a lot more interest amongst companies in having a standard. In fact, some of them were quite surprised that one already existed. And so I think we'll see a bit more about this particular standard. There's also textile rental products for the food industry, pharmaceutical and healthcare sectors. These are workwear, essentially, workwear for the food industry, which has been for quite some time a significant market. And there are standards for producing hygienically clean garments. The standards also allow you to show compliance with certain EU directives and CE marking. So, for instance, the machinery directive, which covers the safe design and construction of machinery, there are a whole range of standards for all of the different operating machinery in a laundry and also in retail cleaning. So dry cleaning machines for Burke and for flammable solvents such as hydrocarbon. The Medical Devices Directive, you'd wonder why that would be involved with the industry, but of course we process a lot of theatre textiles, operating room textiles, which are there for controlling infection, and that is one of the criteria for the Medical Devices Directive. So laundries who are involved in processing operating room textiles actually have to comply with the Medical Devices Directive. And by adopting and complying with the standards in this particular area, you can show compliance to your customers. And PPE, it's a similar thing. There are a whole range of different personal protective equipment garments for clothing, for against fire, for instance, heat, flames, electrostatic discharge, all that kind of thing, which can be offered for textile rental, and you have to be able to know which standards you need to comply with to be in conformance with the PPE directive. Important recent developments, the biocontamination control standard for hygiene, BSEN 14065. I try not to use numbers because if you're not careful, the whole lecture can be just churning out loads and loads of different standards numbers. But this particular standard is of great use to the healthcare sector and for the food industry particularly. And the standard is being revised at the moment. Hopefully the editing has been finished and the revised standard will be published next month. Improvements are in regard to prerequisites for laundries implementing 14065. The prerequisites mainly deal with housekeeping issues. There's an obligation to meet all the legislative requirements within every country, but the essence of prerequisites is to look after the housekeeping in the laundry up to a particular high standard before you would then implement all the hygiene requirements. There are new methods of, or an improved process for determining biohazard and risk assessment from biohazard. The identification of control points in the process or in the laundering process, which have to do with the well-being of the process and the well-being of the product. Not necessarily critical, because the critical process control points have to be identified and validated as well. The critical control points are those control points which are critical to the safety of the product. There are some new work items have been proposed for retail cleaning. ISO 3175 is the overall standard for test methods for testing apparel and interior textiles in full-scale laundry machines. And there are 4 parts to that, as I mentioned before. But Part 5 is a new one, which has been proposed for cleaning in dibutoxymethane, or DBM, also known as K4. And the 6th part has also been proposed for cleaning in the siloxane D5, which is also known as green earth. You can expect that those parts would be developed in the next 2 to 3 years, and that garment manufacturers would be expected to test in those products before putting on a care label. So in that way, the standards organisations are keeping pace with developments within the industry. Another standard I mentioned before, operating theatre textiles, that's under revision at the moment, and hopefully we'll get that out by the early 2017. And this will include some more information on comfort, design, risk analysis of the against the surgical procedure, rationale for setting the performance requirements of the garments. I think it's particularly important that comfort and design are included there, because it's rather satisfying or encouraging to people to know that when they're being operated on, if they're unfortunate enough to be in that situation, that at least the surgeon's feeling comfortable in the garments he's wearing, and that you're protected from infection. We haven't had a success everywhere with standards work. There's a new standard out, EN 16616, which is testing for chemical disinfectants to be used in laundering. That is an alternative to thermal disinfection, because the chemical disinfection, at least in principle, offers you the opportunity to process at lower temperatures, and therefore is energy saving. This particular standard is sometimes, or rather expecting that it will be used as a kind of justification for new processes being offered. In point of fact, it's a laboratory test which is testing the efficacy of the chemical disinfectant itself. And the UK had issues with the actual testing protocol. And although we voted against publication of this standard, it has been published, but it was being published in the UK with a national annex which explains our reservations about the test method. So that's why I say it's not a success everywhere. There's also a new work item proposal for eco-labelling non-domestic laundry machinery. Most domestic laundry, so your washing machine at home, or your dishwasher, or your tumble dryer, will have an eco label on it these days. The situation there, though, is that all of the programs in those machines are hardwired in, so it's possible to actually measure how much energy they use in those wired-in programs, and so compare machine with machine. But as you know, in the laundry industry, there's a whole range of different machines, different programs that you would use for different products and different classifications and different soiling levels. So it's very difficult to see how you could end up with a eco-labelling that actually means anything in that situation. And we're rather feeling that it's a bit of a job for the boys, and somebody's making some money out of this. So the benefits for the industry, protection in the purchase of machinery, because you get a good idea of how what resources the machinery will use. So they're reliably related for resources, safely designed and constructed, and CE marked, and they're properly tested and care-labelled textiles for retail cleaning and also for textile rental, including PPE. Promotion of the industry, you're able to claim the standards and demonstrate customers' compliance demonstrate compliance to customers for the purposes of EU directives, management standards in quality, hazard and risk, and hygiene. I've run out. Any questions?